Okay, good morning everyone. Shalom Aleichem. Bruchim Abam. We have a historic shir today. If you're zoicha to hear this information, your great-grandmother must have really prayed well that you should be zoicha to understand the historic opportunity of Erev Pesach Shechaliyos b'Shabbos. We have Bruchim Abam to the Monday afternoon Agar de Pirka National Shir. Before we begin, make sure you're equipped and ready for the Yom Tov of Pesach. You have the Sefer Maggid Harakiah on Chodesh Nisan, Pesach, and Haggadah Shel Pesach. Next, make sure you have the English Haggadah. There's information here that's not in the Hebrew Sefer. A lot of very important information. Then, make sure you have the French Haggadah. This is the French Haggadah. Because how are you supposed to say the Manashtana in French if you don't have the French Haggadah? Then make sure you have the Spanish Haggadah. Okay? So make sure you're fully equipped. You know, Pesach is a Yom Tov of fours. There are 4 questions. There are 4 sons. There are 4 cups. There are 4 lashonos of gula. And you need to have 4 Haggadahs. If anybody wants to participate in upcoming Svarim, next in the queue is Sefer Tzipisa Yeshua of the Chaim with essays on the topic of the coming of Mashiach, as well as a translation and elucidation of the Chaim's Sefer. Okay, Marva Rabbeisai, away we go. We have really incredible information today. A couple of years ago, when I had some time on my hands, I came into Brooklyn, and I figured I'm coming into Brooklyn, I should get a new sefer. You know, it's a halacha. When you go into Brooklyn, you get a new sefer. And I was very into the Svarim of Reb Chaim Filag'i. Now, the Svarim of Reb Chaim Filag'i, they're expensive Svarim. And I bought 2 Svarim called Re'ei Chaim of Reb Chaim Filag'i. I guess I didn't look at it too carefully. And as I'm driving home from Brooklyn, I looked more carefully at the Svarim Re'ei Chaim, and it turns out the Svarim Re'ei Chaim were Sheva Brachos Torah on all the parshios of the Torah. Now, I am a rabbi, but I don't need Sheva Brachos for every single parsha of the year. You know, I have a lot of Svarim, and you have to use some discretion. You can't just buy every single sefer. So I was sort of wondering, did I really get the right sefer? Shortly after that, a friend of mine, the Rosh Kollel of Ashdod, who's a Talmud of Rav Shach and Rav Shmuel Rozovsky, he actually wrote Zichron Shmuel, and he wrote Chidushei Rav Shmuel on Baba Basra. He once heard me speak. He knows my style a little bit, and he says, Rabbi Glatstein, you wouldn't believe it. There's an amazing drasha of Reb Chaim Filag'i on Erev Pesach Shechaliyos b'Shabbos. I said, really? Where? Which sefer? He said, in the Sefer Re'ei Chaim. I said, I can't believe it. I just bought the Sefer Re'ei Chaim. And sure enough, in his drasha of Parshas Vayikra, he calls it Drasha of Parshas Vayikra, L'Shabbos Hagadol, Zayin Nisan. So let's make a little cheshbon. Zayin Nisan is Shabbos Hagadol. If Zayin Nisan was Shabbos, then Yudalad Nisan is Shabbos. That means it's Erev Pesach Shechaliyos b'Shabbos. And he calls the Shabbos before Shabbos Hagadol. So the first Chidush Noira is that you see from Reb Chaim Filag'i that it's not just you give the Shabbos Hagadol drasha mukdam a week before, but this past Shabbos becomes Shabbos Hagadol. Furthermore, he said he's not the first one to advance the reading, to advance the Shabbos Hagadol drasha to the Shabbos before. Already, Maran HaChabiv, the Knesset Hagdoila, and Umaran Malka Moirenu Harava Muvak, the Mare Hagadol, also advanced the drasha to the week before, and therefore he as well will advance the Shabbos Hagadol drasha to the week before. So that already was an amazing treasure, that when Shabbos Hagadol, that when Zayin Nisan is Shabbos and Yudalad Nisan is Shabbos, Zayin Nisan is Shabbos Hagadol, and the Shabbos Hagadol drasha is advanced to the Shabbos before. Okay, so Merv Rabbi say, here we go. This is an amazing exposition on the Gemara Pesachim, Daf Samach Vav Amud Aleph, about the famous account of whether the Korban Pesach is Doicha Shabbos. How would there be a scenario that the Korban Pesach has to be brought on Shabbos if it's Erev Pesach Shechalios b'Shabbos? So the Gemara says like this: Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Halacha zu nis'alma mibnei Beseira. This halacha was forgotten from the Bnei Beseira. Pamachas, one time, Chal Arba Asar Lios b'Shabbos. One time, the 14th of Nisan came out on Shabbos. Shachachai, they forgot. V'lo yadai, they didn't know. In Pesach doiches Shabbos imlav. They didn't know if Pesach is doicha Shabbos or not. They didn't know what to do. So, Amru, they said, Klum yesh adam sheyodei am Pesach doiches Shabbos. Is there anyone who knows if Pesach pushes off Shabbos imlav? They didn't know what to do. Do you bring the Korban Pesach on Shabbos? Amru lahem. So they said to the Bnei Beseira. The Bnei Beseira were the leaders of the Jewish people. They were the Nasiim of Klal Yisrael. Adam echad yesh she'ala mi Bavel. There's one guy who came up from Bavel. V'Hillel habavli shemai. And his name was Hillel habavli. Sheshimesh shnei gedolei hadar. That he serviced the two gedolim in Klal Yisrael, the two Gedolei Hadar, Shmaya v'Avtalyon, v'Yodeya, he knows in Pesach doiches Shabbos imlav. He knows if Pesach is doiches Shabbos. Interesting. How did they know he would know? But they knew he would know. Shalchu, they called him. Shalchu, they sent. V'Karolai, they called. Amrulai, they said, Klomato Yodeya ma Pesach doiches Shabbos imlav. Do you know if Pesach is doiches Shabbos or not? They asked him, do you know or not? So Amar Lahem, he said, what are you talking about? What? The Korban Pesach is the only carbon a year that there's a question if it's Doicha Shabbos. There are more than 200 carbonos a year that are Doicha Shabbos. The carbon Tamid, every Shabbos is Doicha Shabbos. All the carbonos of Yom Tovim are Doicha Shabbos. Amrulai, they said to him, how do you know? How do you know? How do you know that? How are you so sure? Amar Lahem, he said to him, Amar Lahem minayin lecha. How do you know? Amar Lahem, he said, very simple. Nemar mayadai b'Pesach. It says the word mayadai by the Korban Pesach. V'nemar mayadai b'Tamid. It says the word mayadai by the Korban Tamid. Ma mayadai ha'amor b'Tamid doiches HaShabbos. Just like the mayadai that it says by the Korban Tamid is doiches Shabbos. Af mayadai ha'amor b'Pesach doiches HaShabbos. So too, the mayadai that it says by the Korban Pesach is doiches Shabbos. So number one, Hillel says there's a gzeira shava. Number two, v'oid kavachomer. There's a kavachomer. Uma tamid she'ein anosh kares doiches HaShabbos. If the Korban tamid, that if you don't bring it, you're not punished with kares, it's doiches Shabbos. Pesach, the Korban Pesach, sha'anosh kares, that the punishment for failure to bring the Pesach is a kares, eino din shedoiches HaShabbos, all the more so it's doiches Shabbos. So what they do? Miyad hoishivuhu b'roish. They made him the Nasi. You hear this? Hillel advanced two arguments that the Korban Pesach is doiches Shabbos. Number one, gzeira shava, mayadoi, mayadoi. Number two, kavachomer. If the tamid, which you're not chayiv kares, is doiches Shabbos, so too the Korban Pesach, that if you don't bring it, your chayiv kares is definitely doiches Shabbos. So they positioned him, uminuhu nasi aleim. They made Hillel the Nasi over Klal Yisrael because he knew the halacha that the Korban Pesach is doiches Shabbos. Okay. So now that Hillel's the Nasi, v'haya doiresh kol hayom kuloi b'hilchos HaPesach. He was darshaning the whole day in Hilchos HaPesach. Hischil mekanteron b'dvarim. Hillel began to challenge them with the words. He began to, so to speak, question them. He began to poke at them. He said, Amar lohen, mi garam lachem she'e'ela mi Bavel? Who caused that I should come up from Bavel, ve'eya nasi aleichem, and I should be the Nasi? You know why I'm the Nasi and you're not? It's because atzlus shahoisa b'chem. It's because of the laziness that you have. that you had. It's because of your laziness. You did not serve the two Gedolei Hadar, Shmai and Avtalion. Amrulai. By the way, I heard from our Rosh Hashiva, Zechatag the Bracha of Henoch Libowitz, that these comments of Hillel were the most difficult comments he ever had to make in his whole life. Hillel was the paragon of humility. The Gemara says in Shabbos, La'olam yehi adam anvasan ki Hillel. Yet, when the time called for him to admonish and to give a rebuke to the Bnei B'Seira, he had to muster up and summon up the courage to, so to speak, tell them what they needed to hear. So Amrulai, they said to him, we have one more question. Rebbe! Now here it's very interesting. They're all of a sudden calling him Rebbe here. They say, Shachach v'lo hevi sakin me Erev Shabbos mahu. What's the halach if somebody forgets and he didn't bring a knife from Erev Shabbos? Are you allowed to bring the knife on Shabbos? We know the Korban Pesach is doicha Shabbos, but are you allowed to carry the knife on Shabbos? Amar Lohen, he said, I'll tell you the truth, I forgot that one. Halacha zu shamati v'shachachti. This halacha, I heard it and I forgot it. So Hillel said, here's what you're going to do. Elahanach lahen li Yisrael. Let the Jewish people be. Im ein neviim, if they are not prophets, hein, b'nei neviim hein. They are the sons of prophets. Lamachar, tomorrow, the machar, the next day, misha pischai tila taichvai b'tzimrai. Somebody who brought a sheep as a Korban Pesach, stuck the knife in the wall. Misha pischai gedi, someone whose Korban Pesach was a goat, toichvai bein karnav, stuck it between the horns of the ram, of the kid, of the goat. Hillel said, Taka ra'a maisa, he saw the story. V'nizkar halacha, he remembered the halacha. V'amar, he said, Kach mikoblani mi pishmaya v'avtalyain. So did I receive from Shayotah. In other words, yes, that's exactly how I remember it. You don't carry it outright, you put it in the animal. Friends, comes Reb Chaim Filag'i, and Reb Chaim Filag'i says, Be'einav, take a look in number 2, says Reb Chaim Filag'i, V'chol asher yavar b'maimer halazeh, anyone who reviews this Gemara, Be'einav yireh, he'll see with his eyes, Demereisha l'seife kulay miksha, from beginning to end, it's entirely difficult. This Gemara is impossible to understand. Anyone who honestly reviews this Gemara will see that from beginning to end, the whole Gemara is difficult. Reb Chaim Filag'i goes on to ask 6 questions on this Gemara. By the way, I'll tell you a little secret. A little bit ago, a couple years ago, I met a Satmar guy who had a connection with the Turkish government, who had received an invitation from the ambassador of Turkey to bring a group of Jewish people to Turkey. So he asked me, Rabbi Glatstein, you want to come to Turkey? And I said, yeah, sure. The only thing is I want to go to the kever of Reb Chaim Filag'i. Also, I want to go to the kever of Reb Eliyahu HaKohen of Izmir. My children, I have, by the way, besides the online audience, I also have a live audience right here in my studios. I have Rabbi Meir Glatstein. Rabbi Meir is a direct descendant of Reb Eliyahu HaKohen of Izmir, because my wife comes from the Baal Shevet Musar. I guess, if your wife comes from the Shevet Musar, you better get your act together, because, But anyway, I went to the kever of Reb Chaim Filag'i. I was at the kever of Reb Avram Filag'i. I was at the kever of Reb Eliyahu HaKohen of Izmir. I even found the kever of one of Reb Chaim Filag'i's children. Originally, the invitation did not work out, but a little while later, they were able to smooth things out, and I was zoicha to be in Izmir. And I'll tell you the truth, I was never so frightened in my life. So here we go, friends. Fasten your seatbelts. Reb Chaim Filag'i's 6 questions on this Gemara. Number 1, it says the halacha was forgotten by the Bnei B'Seira. Could someone tell me, since when do Tanoim forget halachas? Do we find other halachas that the Tanoim forgot? We don't find other halachas that the Tanoim forgot. We find there are halachas that were forgotten during the Avelos of Moshe Rabbeinu. We find that Moshe Rabbeinu forgot halachas, but in the times of the Tanoim, that they forgot a halacha. And why? Dafka, the halacha of carbon Pesach Shechalios b'Shabbos. Pesach Shechalios b'Shabbos. Is it so unusual? Is it such an obscure halacha that the carbon that Pesach could fall out on Erev Pesach would fall out on Shabbos? It's not so unusual. It happened this year. It happened 4 years ago. It happened 13 years before that. Why didn't they know this halacha? Number 2, they say, you know who knows? Hillel Habavli. Hillel Habavli. Hillel the Babylonian. How many times in Shas is he called Hillel the Babylonian? This is the only time. This is the only time he's called Hillel the Babylonian. Why do they give him this unusual name? Hillel the Babylonian. That wasn't his name. Everyone knows Hillel. Number 3, they say, oh, does anybody know? By the way, Rabbi Chaim Filag'i asks, question number 3. It says, the Bnei Beseira forgot, they didn't know. What does that mean? They forgot. They didn't know. Either they forgot or they didn't know. You can't have both. How do you forget and not know? What does that even mean? They forgot, they didn't know. Then they said, yeah, there's one guy who knows. Who? Hillel Habavli. Why this dramatic introduction? One guy. Say, Hillel Habavli knows. Here's another question. How did they know that he knew? And if they knew that he knew, why didn't they know what he knowed? In other words, if they knew what he knew, why didn't they know what he knew? But they knew that he knew, but they didn't know what he knew. How's that possible even? How's it possible they knew that he knew, but they didn't know what he knew? And then finally, it says that after he restored the halacha, they called him Rebbe. Rebbe. What, because he knew this obscure halacha, he's called Rebbe? This was not Hillel's debut. He wasn't a rookie. Hillel's been around for a while. He's one of the undisputed Gedolei Hadar. So either if he was a Rebbe, if he was not a Rebbe before, this makes him a Rebbe? Why are they only calling him a Rebbe now? Well, comes Reb Chaim Filag'i and he begins his amazing presentation with the incredible question of Reb Chaim Avraham Gatinio in the Sefer Tiras Kesef. And that is, you ready? The Gemara in Shabbos tells us that when the Klal Yisrael came out of Mitzrayim, they made the Mishkan in year 2. When? What day was the Mishkan erected? Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Chazal say that Rosh Chodesh Nisan took 10 crowns. So that means Rosh Chodesh Nisan was in year 2, and Chazal say that Rosh Chodesh Nisan was a Sunday. It was the first day of the week. Now, if Rosh Chodesh Nisan was Sunday, then Zayin Nisan was Shabbos. Then Yudalid Nisan was Shabbos. That means it was Erev Pesach Shechalios b'Shabbos. And the Almighty came to a man by the name of Moses. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe and he said, tell Bnei Yisrael to bring the carbon Pesach. When? On Erev Pesach. And what day of the week was it? Shabbos. That means the Lord told the Jewish people to bring the carbon Pesach on Shabbos. Because the year that they built the Mishkan, it was Erev Pesach Shechalios b'Shabbos, because Rosh Chodesh was Sunday. Do you know how many times the Klal Yisrael brought a carbon Pesach in the Midbar? They only brought it once in year 2, you know? That's the opening Rashi in Sefer Bamidbar. They only brought one carbon Pesach in the Midbar in year 2, and it was Erev Pesach Shechalios b'Shabbos. So could somebody please tell me why the Bnei Beseira didn't know the halacha that carbon Pesach is Doicha Shabbos? Do they believe in the Chumash? In the Chumash, God told Moses to bring a carbon Pesach on Shabbos. So what's the shaila of the Bnei Beseira? Is carbon Pesach Doicha Shabbos? The mitzvah of carbon Pesach was given in a year that Pesach came out on a Sunday and Erev Pesach was Shabbos. Says Reb Chaim Filag'i that Reb Chaim Abulafia one of the early Mikubalim, teaches that it's not conclusive that Karban Pesach is Doicha Shabbos. And the reason is because by the Karban Pesach it says, Ki savayu el haaretz, when you come into the land. Which means you could make the case that maybe you're only chayiv in Karban Pesach when you enter Eretz Yisrael, la'achar Yerusha v'yeshiva, after you inherit the land and after you settle the land. And that's why, does anybody know how many Karbanos Pesach were they makriv in the Midbar? This was the only one. Why? But I thought you could only be makriv the Karban Pesach in Eretz Yisrael. The answer is this Karban was a Hayrashah. You could argue that it's not conclusive that the Karban Pesach is Doicha Shabbos because it was a Hayrashah. It was a Hayrashah. It was a special scenario. It was a special Gzeres HaKosov. So therefore, you can't prove for the Karban Pesach in the Midbar that Karban Pesach is Doicha Shabbos. It was a Hayrashah. Ve'ein lamedim mimenu. Okay, friends, you ready? We're going to drop now the biggest bombshell of the year, and I mean that seriously. Comes Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. You know, there were twins by the name of Cain and Hevel. You ever hear of them? Meir knows who they are. Who is their father? Adam Rishon. Now, you know, when Cain and Hevel were born, it's not like nowadays. Nowadays, first there's Shidduchim, then there's a L'chaim, then there's a Vart, then an Afraf, then a wedding, then Shabbos Sheva Brachos, then a little while later there's a Leda, maybe a Bris, and this whole step-by-step relationship has many phases. No. Back in the day, everything happened b'bas achas. It was like matzah, 18 minutes. Adam Rishon got married, had children, all on the same day. The L'chaim, the Vart, the Afraf, the Shabbos Sheva Brachos, the Leda, the Mila, was all in one day. Cain and Hevel were born on the same day Adam was born. On the first day of the creation of man. It was all b'bas achas. Okay. There was no wasting time. Says Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. On that, at that time, Adam Rishon had these two kids, and he says, Kinderlach, Pesach is coming. Higia leil Yom Tov shel Pesach. Amar lohem Adam lebanav. Belel zeh asidin Yisrael lahakriv karbanos. Hakrivu gam atem. You bring a carbon. Herzamaisa. The day that they were born, they were told, bring the Karban Pesach. So Cain says, what should I bring? I work in linen, I'll bring flaxseed. I don't know what kind of carbon that is. I guess flaxseed bread. That means, I guess, people eat that. There are people that eat flaxseed bread. I can't explain why they do that. People do strange things. People eat tuna fish also. But Cain decided to bring flaxseed. Hevel said, I deal in lamb. I'm going to bring lamb chops. Friends, which carbon did God prefer? Flaxseed bread or lamb chops? Vayisha Hashem el Hevel v'el minchasai. God preferred the lamb chops. What did he think of Cain's carbon? It was nisav. It was disgusting. I don't blame Hashem, you know. I would also choose lamb chops over the flaxseed. In any event, says Reb Chaim Filag'i, you know, I always thought, when did Hashem create Adam Rishon? There's a machlokes. B'tishrei nivra ha'olam or b'nisan nivra ha'olam. So in the opinion b'tishrei nivra ha'olam, what does that mean? It doesn't mean God created the world Aleph Tishrei. God said Naseh Adam on Aleph Tishrei. He said let there be light 6 days earlier on Chaf Hei Adar. So I always assumed or presumed that so too in the Manda Amar, that B'Nisan Nivra Ha'olam, that God created man on on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and he said, let there be light 6 days earlier on Chaf Hei Adar. No, says Reb Chaim Filag'i. We see from Pirkei Rebbe Lezer, the day they were born, they brought a carbon Pesach. Says Reb Chaim Filag'i, according to the opinion that the world was created in Nisan, it means Hashem said, Nase Adam on Yud Gimel Nisan. And Hashem said, let there be light on Ches Nisan. So on Ches Nisan, God said, let there be light. To Ches, Tes, Yud, Yud Aleph, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, the 6th day of creation is Yud Gimel Nisan. When we say Zeh Hayoim Tchilas Ma'asecha Zikaron Liyom Rishon, it's referring to Yud Gimel Nisan. Friends, over the years we discussed the question of the Achronim. Why don't we say Tachnun on Yud Gimel Nisan? We know the first 12 days of Nisan, we don't say Tachnun because it's the days the Nesiim brought the Karbanos. But why don't we say Tachnun on Yud Gimel Nisan? Now we have a new reason. Yud Gimel Nisan is the day of the creation of the world. Zeh Hayoim Tchilas Ma'asecha Zikaron Liyom Rishon. And that night was Shabbos. It was Erev Pesach Shechaliyos b'Shabbos. That night was Shabbos Hagadol. And Adam HaRishon says, you need to bring a carbon. And they brought a carbon. Listen carefully. It says, when did they bring the carbon? Vayihi miketz yamim. It was the end of days. It was the end of the days. What does it mean, the end of days? You see, Sunday and Monday are days, they're a pair. Tuesday and Wednesday are days, they're a pair. Wednesday and Thursday and Friday are days, they're a pair. Shabbos is not part of days. Shabbos has no zivug. It was at the end of days they brought the carbon on Shabbos because Adam HaRishon told them to be makriv the carbon on Shabbos. Here you have it, friends. Adam told Cain and Hevel to be makriv the carbon Pesach on Shabbos. So the first psak halacha in history was Adam HaRishon telling Cain and Hevel to be makriv the carbon Pesach on Shabbos. Friends, but Adam HaRishon made a mistake. Because if Cain and Hevel were born on Friday, that means that Adam lived with Chava on Friday. But Oinas Talmidei Chachamim, Erev Shabbos is Friday night. Do you know who rectified that infraction of Adam? Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu is Me'ein Shufrei the Adam HaRishon. And Yaakov Avinu then patiently waits to live with his spouse 7 years. Do you know when Yaakov married Rachel? You know when Yaakov married Rachel? Shabbos HaGadol! Really? Who says that? The Arizal. It says that Lavan. It says, Vayesoif Lavan es kol anshe hamakim vayas mishteh. Vayas mishteh is gematria. I'm sorry, mishteh. Mishteh is gematria Shabbos Gadol. Also, davar beitoi matoiv is gematria Shabbos Hagadol. Davar beitoi matoiv is gematria Shabbos Hagadol. So Yaakov Avinu, listen carefully, he rectifies the sin of Adam. Adam prematurely lived with Chava. So Yaakov Avinu patiently waits 7 years to live with Leah. By the way, I want to share with you a new chiddush. That means Yaakov, if he married Leah on Shabbos Hagadol, which, by the way, that Rizal says it was Erev Pesach Shechaliyos b'Shabbos. So if Yaakov married Leah on Erev Shabbos, on Erev Pesach Shechaliyos b'Shabbos, he had to wait 7 days to marry Rachel. He married Rachel on Shvi Shel Pesach, which means the most anticipated shidduch in the history of the world was Shvi Shel Pesach. Now we understand. Kasha zivugay shal Adam kekriyas Yamsuf. On the day of Kriyas Yamsuf, Yaakov married Rachel. Says Reb Chaim Filag'i, you know why the Shabbos before Pesach is called Shabbos Hagadol? Because the very first Shabbos in history was Shabbos Hagadol. It was a historic Shabbos. It's called Shabbos Hagadol because the very first Shabbos in history was Shabbos Hagadol. But it's more than that. Because Chazal say, Vayivarech Elokim es Yom HaShvi. What does it mean by Vayivarech Elokim es Yom HaShvi? Hashem blessed the seventh day with a light of light. The Medrash says, Berchai Ba'oira. We know that Friday night, the first Friday night of creation, the sun did not set. The sun serviced the world for 36 hours. That's why it's called Shabbos Hagadol. Literally, the 24-hour time period was 36 hours. The reason it's called Shabbos Hagadol is it was the longest day of the year. Now, did you know that Rashi says it's called Shabbos Hagadol? Because why do we call Yom Kippur Tzoyma Rabbah? Because since you're not eating and drinking, it's a very, very long day. It feels like it's never going to end. So too, Rashi says in the Sefer HaPardes, on Shabbos Hagadol, the rabbi talks and he 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 talks, and you feel like it's never going to end. So it seems like a very big day. But do you know why it feels like it's never going to end? Because you think it's a 24-hour period, but really there are 36 hours jam-packed into those 24 hours. So the rabbi scheduled an hour drasha, but it feels like it's a 3-hour drasha. Not only because you find it boring, because Hashem is packing in extra hours into that hour. So the rabbi speaks for an hour and it feels like 2 hours. You know, somebody once came over to the rabbi after the drasha. The rabbi spoke for 2 hours. The guy was in video. He said, Rabbi, you think you could make like a 10-minute clip to summarize the drasha? The rabbi was all excited. The guy's going to make a clip and it's going to get out there. The rabbi said, I think I could do it. He said, so you should have. Anyway. So says Reb Chaim Filag'i that it's called Shabbos Hagadol because it's the first Shabbos in history. It's called Shabbos Hagadol because literally it was a 36-hour period of time. Let's proceed, friends. The Gemara Masechta Shabbos on Daf Kuf Mem Zayin talks about the Aseres Hashvatim, the 10 tribes. They went lost forever because they got caught up in something called Chamra de Prugaisa, special wines, and the hot springs of the Yumsis, special spas. The Aseres Hashvatim went to a luxury Pesach program and they went lost forever. The Gemara says that Rabbi Elazar ben Arach also found the wine of Prugaisa and the spas of the Yumasis, and Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, the greatest of all the Tanoim, who the Mishnah in Avos says if you put all the Chachamim on one side of the scale and Rabbi Elazar ben Arach on the other side, he would outweigh everyone. The Gemara says he akrei Talmudei, he forgot his learning. Instead of reading it, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, he read it, HaCharesh Haya Libam. Instead of reading it, the new month is for you, he read it, your heart was stuffed up. Think carefully. Instead of reading it, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Daled Zayin Chaf, he read it, Reish Yud Beis HaCharesh Haya Libam. So a friend of mine, a tzaddik in Muncie, Reb David Friedman, brought me a new copy of Likutei Shoshanim of Reb Shamshin of Ashtapol, who uncovers the secret of this Gemara. He says the divine name that helps remember learning is Daled Zayin Chaf, 31. Daled Zayin Chaf, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. The name of the dark side that makes us forget is Reish Yud Beis. Reish Yud Beis, rib. People go to a restaurant, they eat a rib eye steak, and they forget all their learning. Reish Yud Beis makes you forget your learning. Says the Chidah, you know why we call Talmidei Chachamim Rebbe? They're called Rebbe. This is the Pnei David. They're called Rebbe because they're mavatel the klipa of Reish Yud Beis. Reish Yud Beis makes us forget our Torah. By the way, the forces of evil have a entourage of 605 soldiers that make you forget your learning. That's why Torah is, you stick a Vav in the 605. Vav is the tree of life, and it's Mavatel, the 605 forces of Tumah. By the way, Hacharesh, Haya, Libam is Gematria 605. Those are the forces of evil that make us forget our learning. On the other hand, HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem is 424, Mashiach ben David. You know that? HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem. Give me 5 for that. HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem is Gematria Mashiach ben David. Now, by the way, I would add, the reason why Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, we call him Rebbe, because he saw Torah was going to be forgotten. So he committed the Torah to writing, to overcome the klipa of Reish Yud Beis. So therefore we say he's Rebbe. Now, says Reb Chaim Filag'i, why did Rabbi Elazar ben Arach specifically forget the halacha of HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem? He says, very simple, HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem is the first mitzvah in the Torah. And because it's the first mitzvah, what mitzvah do you feel the forces of Reish Yud Beis would try to make you forget? Kol haschalois kashais, all beginnings are difficult. So therefore, the forces of Reish Yud Beis would try to make us forget the very first mitzvah. Says Reb Chaim Filag'i, this gives us a deeper insight into what Rashi, the first Rashi in Chumash, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Lo haya lo lahaschel, ela me hachodesh hazeh lochem. We should have only begun from hachodesh hazeh lochem. Why? Because since the first mitzvah ever fulfilled was Korban Pesach of Cain and Hevel, and the Korban Pesach is introduced with the mitzvah of hachodesh hazeh lochem, therefore Rashi says the Torah should have began with hachodesh hazeh lochem. Says Reb Chaim Filag'i, ready for this? Does anybody know what is the Haftarah of Shabbos Haggadah? Anybody know? Whoever knows will get a free copy of the French edition of the Haggadah. Okay, Reb Tzvi is going to win the French edition of the Haggadah Shel Pesach. You have to send me your address after. Okay. We lane. Val Hashem in Chas Yehuda v'Yerushalayim ki mehei aylam uchshanim kadmoiniyais. It should be sweet to Hashem, the mincha of Yehuda Yerushalayim, like the days of yore and like the earliest time. Rabbi Yaakov Emden in the Marag Tzia brings an opinion that some say we only read this Haftarah if Erev Pesach comes out on Shabbos. And Rabbi Yaakov Emden rejects that opinion. He said, what difference would it make if it's Erev Pesach Shechalios b'Shabbos or Erev Pesach Shechalios b'Tuesday? Comes Reb Chaim Filag'i, no, there's a very big difference between Erev Pesach Shechalios b'Shabbos. How do we know, friends, how do we know the Korban Pesach is Doicha Shabbos? We know it from Cain and Hevel in Gan Eden. So therefore, there's an opinion that when Erev Pesach comes out on Shabbos, we say, you know why we're Makar of the Korban Pesach today? V'yarval Hashem min Chas Yehuda v'Yerushalayim ki mei olam uchshanim kamonias. We say, Rebbeinu Shem, it should be sweet to you. This Korban Pesach should be sweet to you, like the carbon of Cain and Hevel, who were makar of their carbon in Gan Eden. That's the reason why we read this Haftarah on our Pesach Shechalios b'Shabbos. I would say the reason why we always read it is because we're Mispalel Hashem. We would like our Korban Pesach to be as sweet to you as when Hevel brought his Korban Pesach in Gan Eden. In any event, friends, says Reb Chaim Filag'i, with this understanding of the Gemara, we could come back and understand the amazing Gemara in Masechta Pesachim with the Bnei Beseira. Says Reb Chaim Filag'i, the Gemara opens up that the Bnei Beseira They forgot the halacha of Korban Pesach. You know why it opens up that way? We're trying to cut them some slack. We're trying to say it's not their fault that they forgot. They didn't forget just an ordinary halacha. They forgot the halacha of Korban Pesach. That's the very first halacha in the Torah. That's a halacha that one would be prone to forget, because the Sitra Achra will exert all of his energy to try to make us forget this particular halacha. So they say, who we're going to call? Adam Echad Yesh, there's one guy. Hillel Habavli Shemai. Hillel would know this halacha. How did they know Hillel would know the halacha? The Chesed Li'Avram, the great-great-grandfather of the Chidah, says, you know who Hillel is? Hillel's the Gilgal of Hevel. Hillel's the Gilgal of Hevel. And tzaddikim are familiar with their Shirish HaNeshama. We've got a hunch he would know what to do in this circumstance. After all, the very first Karban ever brought was brought by Hevel on Erev Pesach, Shechaliyos b'Shabbos. So you know what name they call him? Habavli! Habavli is oisiyos. Hevel bi. Hevel is in me. So they knew that he knew, but they didn't know what he would know. They knew he knew something, but they didn't quite know how much he would remember from thousands of years earlier. You know, after like 1,500 years, the memory gets a little foggy. So they knew Hillel would know, they didn't know what he would know. So the Gemara says, Adam Echad Yesh, there's one guy, Hillel Habavli Shemai. This is the only time in Shas he's called Hillel Habavli, the point being he's Hevel, so he would remember the halacha. So they ask him, what's the halacha? And they say, well, you don't think I remember? I'm the one who brought it. Dad told me to do it. Adam gave me the psak. When Adam gives you a psak, it sticks with you. You remember it for a long time. Adam told me, Mayadoi, Gzera Shava. Adam told me, Kavachoymer, if the Tamid is Doicha Shabbos, certainly the Pesach is Doicha Shabbos. Hillel Habavli Shemai. So they say, you overcame forgetfulness after so many thousands of years. We're going to call you Rebbe. Rebbe indicates you overcame the klipa of Reish Yud Beis. So they knew, he knew, they didn't know what he would know. Ha-chodesh hazeh lachem roish chadashim. Says Reb Chaim Filag'i, Rishon hu lachem lechadshe. Hu lachem lechadshe, Rashi Tevois, Hillel. Hu lachem lechadshe, Rashi Tevois, Hillel. They knew he would know, because ha-chodesh hazeh lachem, 424. is Mashiach ben David. Hacharesh Haya Libam is Gematria 605. Those are the forces of forgetfulness. So they knew he would know. They didn't know what he would know. Turns out that he remembered more than they ever thought he would remember. But friends, the $1 million question is, if Adam Harishon told them to be makriv the Korban Pesach, why didn't Adam Harishon himself bring the Korban Pesach? You know, Adam Harishon sounds like the Rasha. He sounds like, Moho avodah azos lochem, you do it. I'm not doing it. If Adam paskin, the Korban Pesach is doicha Shabbos, why didn't Adam bring the Korban Pesach? Dear friends, simple reason. Because the Nachash lived with Chava. Ba Nachash al Chava vehitel by Zuhama. The Nachash injected poison into Chava. And Chava lived with Adam. So Adam was Tameh. If you look in Parshas Behaloischa, where Hashem told Klal Yisrael to be makriv the Korban Pesach in the Midbar, in the very same breath that Hashem said, be makriv the Korban Pesach on Shabbos, He also said, if you're Tameh, bring Pesach Sheni. So Adam was Tameh. So you know how Adam knew? Listen carefully. You know how Adam knew the Korban Pesach is doicha Shabbos? Because Adam knew that the one time the Pesach is mentioned in Behaloischa, it was Erev Pesach Shechalias b'Shabbos. Hashem told them to be makriv the Korban Pesach, but He also told them that if you're Tameh, then you can't be makriv the Korban Pesach. So Adam knew he couldn't do it, but he knew they could do it. This is a deeper meaning. of the Haftarah, ve'arva lashem minchas Yehuda v'Yerushalayim kimei olam uchshanim kamoni yos. Where Adam Arishain is, where we're saying, Hashem, we're makriv the Korban Pesach, not just like they did in the Midbar, but like on Shabbos, but like Cain and Hevel did on Shabbos. Says Reb Chaim Filag'i, if you look in Sefer Bamidbar, about that first and only Korban Pesach that they brought in the Midbar, there it says, Chukas oilam l'dayroi seichem b'chol moishvoi seichem. You know what that's a remez to? Let the B'nai B'Seira not think that this Korban Pesach was an anomaly. Let the B'nai B'Seira not think this was a Hayrah Shav Ein Lamedim Imenu. No, this Korban Pesach that I'm telling you here in year 2, where it's Erev Pesach Shechalios B'Shabbos, it's Chukas Oilam L'Doiroi Seichem. It needs to be for all generations that the Korban Pesach is Doicha Shabbos. So friends, in a year that Erev Pesach comes out on Shabbos, we revert back to the state of Adam Arishan and Gan Eden, and therefore it gives us the opportunity to create the ultimate tikkun, the ultimate rectification, to bring the world back to the state of Adam Arishan and Gan Eden. Be'ezus Hashem, this year is Tavshin Pei Hei, Tia Shnas, maybe Psichas HaGeula, the year of the beginning of the Geula, because a year that Erev Pesach comes out on Shabbos, we're afforded the opportunity, and the situation is set up just like Adam Arishan and Gan Eden, and through our avodah and through our learning about the Korban Pesach and learning the halacha b'mayadai and the kavachomer, we hope to revert back to the state of Adam Arishan Gan Eden. And this Shabbos we're going to read V'arva Lashem Minchas Yehuda v'Yerushalayim Kimei Olam Uchshanim Kamoni Yos. Kamoni Yos refers to Adam Arishan Began Eden Mikadam. Wishing everyone a Chag Kosher v'Sameach and a Gun Yom Tov. Thank you very much.
Recording stopped.
Baruch Tiyah.